Let me introduce our speakers that have come to talk about evaluation methods in the dissertation. Dr. Tamara Walzer.
Yes, now that you just asked me.
I just asked you. From the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and Dr. Trevison from Washington State University. So I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about who they are and introduce themselves, and they'll take over from here.
Thank you.
Okay. Tamara, you want to go?
Yeah, okay. Tamara Walser, I'm at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. I'm faculty in the Educational Leadership Department, and geez, I've been there, I think 13 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Good stretch.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And I met Mike way back when I was first out of graduate school and took my first faculty position at Washington State University. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yep, Washington State University.
Can you hear? Hang on just a second, because can everybody back there hear? Okay, okay.
Yeah.
I wasn't
I'll
sure
talk
the mic
louder.
was
I'll try to
carrying.
talk
Okay.
loud. I don't think the mic's working for them.
The mic is just for the
It's just for the
Got it.
camera, I think,
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, okay. Mike Trevison, and I've been at WSU. This is my 25th year, and I'm currently the dean of my college, and that's home. We raised our kids there, and now I got grandkids there, and let's see, Sophia. Yeah, so Sophia picked us up at the at the hotel to come over here, and we were just chit-chatting. And I was saying, that the area kind of reminds me of Pullman where I am, and it's pretty. And it was kind of like, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but it was kind of like, yeah, it's okay. So I'm thinking this is kind of a common way of thinking about being in Springfield. That's the common way of thinking about being in Pullman as well. So we share that.
Yeah.
Tamara and I have been hooking up to deal with evaluation-oriented work for, I don't know.
A long time.
It's been a long time. And we just got back from Greece, to tell you. My wife and I and Tamara we do these workshops basically around the world at this point. And we were remarking as we were passing by, my wife sees Tamara in Madrid.
In other countries, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a tough duty, but somebody's got to do it, right? So we're the ones hooking up doing that.
Yeah, she didn't come to Springfield.
She didn't come to Springfield, yeah, no.
She's still recovering from jet lag.
She's still recovering from jet lag, as am I for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is just a real privilege for us to be here. We have some ideas. The ideas are around the capstone, the graduate level capstone, particularly one that's evaluation oriented. And Travis, I think, found Tamara over the internet, and we've had on and off discussions for months about coming here. And so it's finally come to fruition. We know from being faculty members and talking with lots of other people that there's some uncertainty about doing an evaluation-oriented capstone being a dissertation, a master's thesis, whatever. And we think the timing is ripe for some work in this area. So we actually are under contract with Sage Publications, writing a book about this very topic. So the discussion that we have today will help us in that work, because we don't think we've cornered the market by any stretch. All this stuff is evolving, but what we do know is this is a source of challenge, consternation for faculty and students alike in a wide variety of different disciplines. Most of our work has been in the area of education, so this is great to be able to come to a different discipline and profession, in this case, public administration. So we know you all know one another, and we hope to meet everybody through the course of tonight and tomorrow. But we thought one way of introducing people for us, anyway, would be to ask some questions here and then have you stand up so that we can see how you fall out with these different questions. And so the first one is, have you taken a course in program evaluation? And if that's the case, if you would please stand up. Okay? So most, but not all. Okay, thank you very much.
Some of you may get some little exercise, so that's
yeah.
good.
Another one here. Let's see. Whoop, that was a fast click. Are you in the dissertation phase? Okay, I heard I suppose. Okay.
Reluctant standing
All
up.
right, okay. Will you be in the dissertation phase within the next year if you're not currently? Okay. So that, okay.
So we have the commitments now.
And are you conducting an evaluation for your dissertation study? Okay, a couple of people, 3, all right, very good. And are you considering doing that? Okay, another. All right, very good.
We'll get you, we'll condense you the rest of the way tonight.
All right, so here's a statement of use with the material. Since we're under contract with this book, a lot of the book material is in the slides, and Sage doesn't have a problem with that, but they want us to have the statement of use there. Okay, so you can read it. All right, so let's start out with evaluation. Just what is evaluation? And sometimes I think we know precisely what it is, and then other times it seems to be kind of elusive and a little slippery. And there are lots of different definitions out there. Tomorrow, for the summit, I know that there look to be dozens of different organizations, and I know that some of those organizations have their own definition of evaluation. The field of evaluation, both the discipline, and this is one of these things. It's got a discipline and it's got a practice. Okay, so there's some tension from time to time. But it is expanding rapidly. It's worldwide. I'll talk more of the detail there about that tomorrow. But suffice it to say, there are these different definitions. There's context involved. So different contexts have different definitions. Different professions have taken on the mantle of evaluation and have their own definition. It's interdisciplinary, but all of these things kind of make this competition for different definitions of evaluation, and the fact that the field has expanded so quickly, we haven't been able to get out in front as a discipline to say, just what is evaluation? But there is one place for which there is at least some commonality about a definition and some buy-in from several different organizations. So I'll go first to and we'll talk about it in a little more detail, the joint standards for evaluation. And for those people who have had a course in evaluation, did you talk about evaluation standards? This book, just out of curiosity? Mm-hmm. Standards?
We'll talk about it in a little bit.
We'll talk about it. But so back in 1994, here's the definition. Okay? The systematic investigation of the worth or merit of an object. Okay? That's it. That was the definition. And an object is a program, it's a policy, it's a project. Okay? If we fast forward now to 2011, now we've got a really complicated definition. Okay? The systematic investigation of the quality of, now the object is defined more. Okay? And for purposes of decision making, judgment, conclusions, you can see the rest, leading to improvements and or accountability in the user's programs and systems, ultimately contributing to organizational or social value. And as I mentioned, we've got numerous definitions of program evaluation, but there's some consistent aspects to these things. One is systematic investigation or inquiry, determining the quality or valuing, and results used for decision making. So what's an evaluation dissertation? Okay. And we, you know, we've been on the internet, we've got our colleagues, talked with lots of folks, and there's lots of different ideas here. But we've kind of come up with the following. At base, an evaluation dissertation has an evaluation embedded in it. But we'd say it's a learning experience for students. It's a performance assessment. The doctoral committee, graduate program, graduate school. Let me ask this of, say, Travis and other faculty that might be here. Have there, I'm assuming there's been at least one student who has done an evaluation as the base for their dissertation. Is that correct?
Not since I've been involved.
Ah, okay, okay. So somebody here will be that lucky individual who will go through. And I want to say that navigating it through the, I don't know how it's organized here at Springfield, but the graduate school, the graduate program could be an interesting exercise. Yeah, yeah, okay. But it is also, an evaluation dissertation is also a service responsibility to an evaluation client or another stakeholder. I mean, some students, for example, work in an organization and they're going to do an evaluation that is their dissertation, but it's an evaluation of a program or a project or a policy within that. So you've got, you know, this is not just a learning exercise, but it's going to do something for the organization. So there's a certain responsibility to the evaluation client, okay? And that evaluation client, if it's the place you work, you can probably readily identify stakeholders as well, you know? People who have a stake in the program that you're evaluating. Here's some considerations to think about when doing a capstone, a dissertation, a thesis, whatever it might be. But one is the purpose and the scope.
And you all have a handout. One of the handouts on the table
Okay.
is the purpose and scope continuum.
Okay.
So it's going to follow the slides here.
Okay. And on this continuum, we have applied inquiry on one end and basic inquiry on the other. Okay. And applied inquiry is basically something that's going to add some kind of knowledge to the program itself that the organization can use. Okay. On the other end of the continuum, it's academic knowledge. It's something that would advance the discipline or the understanding of the program. It might find its way into a journal article or a conference presentation. Okay. And we think that we make the argument also that for the capstone purpose and scope continuum, these are, we call this distinction the priority purpose. Okay? There's also a focus involved. On one end, it's a problem of practice. On the other end, it's a research problem. And we have a definition here for a problem of practice. I'll give you a moment just to read that, but we didn't invent it. It comes from the Carnegie Project. But the important point is that it is focused. It's a problem identified within an organization, within a program. It is not something that is taken out of a journal article. Okay? Okay. Here's something that could be taken out of a journal article. Okay? A research problem. Find as a gap in the academic knowledge, a gap in the literature. Okay? Okay? Evaluation dissertations typically focus on problems of practice. Okay? And our exposure that we've had is, you know, education, typically K-12 education. So the evaluations there are of programs or policies within a K-12 field. We know of work of social work, for example, people working on masters in social work. They might work for a particular agency, do an evaluation in that context, and it becomes their their thesis. We also make a distinction here with regard to creativity. So in the context of applied inquiry, it'd be more of a focus on problem solving, okay? And for basic inquiry, it'd be more transformational. The scale also differs. Okay? In applied inquiry, there might be just a small number of sites. In basic inquiry, there could be a large number of sites. The research literature also differs in the size and scope. The extent to which theory is involved differs between applied and basic inquiry. The kind of dissemination activities that you'd be involved with also differ. Okay. Here's an exercise. So I want you to think about the dissertation that you're involved with, or you're about to be involved with, whatever. Okay? And I want you to rate it along these different dimensions. So, and rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, okay, where 1 is applied and 5 is basic. Okay? Priority purpose. So in your own minds, okay, and this isn't a report out, this is in your own minds, where would you place it on that continuum?
And Travis, where would you place in terms of what you all require? Think of that too. That would be interesting to think of.
Okay. The focus, where would you place it? How about creativity? Scale. The research literature. Theory. Dissemination priority. And then finally, overall, where would you place your project? Now, I think a lot of the challenges that we've had in higher education is that the model is a research model, right? And it's been that way for 100 years. Okay? What we are paying more attention to, and it sounds like this program is a case in point, is having a educational experience that culminates in a capstone that has professional relevance to it. And that is where our focus is. And in actually conducting an evaluation is about as professionally relevant as it gets. And in addition, it incorporates things like, well, all the technical skills that you learned in coursework. It has all the research methods and the like in there. It also has non-technical skills, professional skills that are involved. Because in doing an evaluation, you actually have to work with people. Okay? And we all know that some people do that well and some people not so much. Okay? But we like the evaluation capstone because it incorporates a wide variety of skills that encapsulates what it means to be a professional. Okay? And we don't necessarily think that our continuum is the right way to think about a professionally oriented capstone, but it is a way to differentiate a professionally oriented capstone from a research-oriented dissertation. And I think what we argue is that it moves us a little farther along towards something that's more professionally relevant. How many, yeah, let's do that stand-up thing again here. I'll just wing it. How many people with their capstone, I'll call it a capstone now, are more on the applied inquiry side of things, if you would stand up? Okay. All right, thank you. How many are more on the basic inquiry side? Okay. Still quite a bit.
Yeah, there's a middle. There's a
Yeah, it's a
middle.
5-point scale, yeah. And that's my point. That was going to be part of my point. We're talking in the extremes to illustrate the issue, but there is a middle.
Right.
And there's some ambiguity in there. And sometimes, even in an applied setting, theory plays a big role. And we associate theory, right, with, basic research. So that kind of illustrates this isn't a completely bulletproof schema, but it is a way, I think, to move us a little farther down the line. So based on these common definitions of evaluation and the kinds of activities, tasks and activities involved in evaluation, what Tamara and I have come up with are what we consider to be fundamentals of evaluation practice. Okay? And we use that as a framework to think about doing a capstone, whether the capstone's a dissertation, a master's thesis, or another one is a culminating project. Some might have been involved with a culminating project. And our fundamentals of evaluation practice look like the following. One, there's quality involved. And quality, that's the standards that I spoke of, and we're going to pull that apart. And I know I'm using a heck of a lot of time here, so yeah. So Tamara said you are. So you can tell we've been working together for a lot of years. There's a lot of honesty here.
But it's good.
But it's good. There are stakeholders involved, and stakeholders in evaluation, we think that's a hallmark of evaluation, because evaluation now is, we expect evaluation to be responsive to stakeholders. Basic research doesn't have to be. Okay? It can be, but it's not obliged to be in the same way that evaluation is. Understanding, so understanding the context, the program, and the like. There's a certain logic to evaluation thinking. There are a wide variety of approaches to be used. And then finally, we ought to use this stuff. Okay? So these are the fundamentals here, and I guess we ought to pick up the pace. So I'm going to turn this over now to Tamara.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So Mike has already mentioned the idea of quality, and the program evaluation standards have already come up. So when we talk about evaluation dissertations or capstones, we talk about the need to use the quality guidelines and standards that were developed with the profession. So the evaluation discipline has developed standards, they've developed competencies, they've developed these things. So those are important for us to use when we're doing this work. So that's just a little summary. And the overview that we'll talk through, I'm going to really just talk about program evaluation standards a little bit tonight. We'll talk a little more about the other ones tomorrow. But here are the other ones, just so you know they exist. The American Evaluation Association. How many of you have heard of American Evaluation Association? Okay, that is the main organization for people who are affiliated with the evaluation profession in mostly the United States, but there are a lot of international people who participate as well. Mike and I, he mentioned we were just in Greece, and that was the European Evaluation Society. So that's their version, or their organization for professional evaluators. So the American Evaluation Association has guiding principles for evaluators that were just updated in 2018. They're on their website, so you can go to their website and see those. AEA also has a statement on cultural competence in evaluation. And they're also developing evaluator competencies. Canada already has, the Canadian Evaluation Society has developed evaluator competencies, and they actually credential evaluators in Canada. And so AEA now has evaluator competencies that are still in draft form, but they look a lot like the Canadian version, and they're based on a lot of research that has come out of the US and Canada and other places. So let's talk a little bit more about program evaluation standards. This is the cover of the book. And if you're working in evaluation, if you see yourself doing a lot of evaluation work down the road, I would highly recommend getting this book because it will be a guide for you. I use it, I have it electronically. I have 10 copies of it in my office, or I did prior to the hurricane. I'm not sure right now. I haven't been allowed to go back in my office, so I'm not really sure what's left in there. But I have multiple copies of this. I use it, and I think Mike probably does too. It's a book that we refer to a lot in our work. So just a little bit in terms of the program evaluation standards. There are 30 standards, and they're organized by what they call attributes of quality evaluation. And the attributes are utility, and there are 8 utility standards. Feasibility, and there are 4 feasibility standards. Propriety, there are 7 standards for that. Accuracy, 8 standards. And, evaluation accountability, there are 3. When evaluation work started back in 60s, 70s, when it really kind of took off, what happened is there weren't people who called themselves evaluators. There were people who did research, and so they started doing work that was evaluation-like, but they were just using what they knew, kind of academic style research. And they focused really strongly on the accuracy part. It was all about technical adequacy. And it was a lot of quantitative work, large comparison group studies, and they ended up not being terribly useful for people who needed evaluation information. Program managers, stakeholders, the big, thick technical reports they received were not useful to them. They didn't understand them. They weren't meaningful for what they were trying to do. Because they didn't really consider all these other things. So when we talk about things like utility, does the evaluation serve its intended purposes and meet the needs of its audiences? So in addition to technical adequacy, for an evaluation to be quality, it also has to have utility. So it also has to meet your stakeholders' needs and serve its intended purposes. It also has to meet feasibility standards. And so we look carefully, we're very pragmatic in evaluation work. And so it has to be practical. Our procedures have to be practical. And so we have to figure out a way to make it a productive evaluation process given the restraints that we always have. We always have resource constraints. We always have constraints with what we're able to do. So we have to figure out a way to make it a good and useful evaluation, but also feasible. Propriety, of course. That's your respectful, ethical, legal. You're in a university, you're going to put your stuff through an IRB, right? So that's one layer of this. There are other layers, though. You probably have some process you have to go through if you're doing it in an organization. You may have some requirements there. I know if you do work in K-12 schools, you often have to go through the school district protocols. For evaluation as well, in addition to kind of what we're required to do, we always have a lens towards being respectful of our stakeholders and being fair in our work. Accuracy, and this is what we talked about earlier, this is kind of, if you're doing research, this is where you focus your effort, is on that technical adequacy, the validity, the trustworthiness. We do that in evaluation too. We just do a whole lot of other stuff. So when I work with faculty and they think an evaluation might be an easier road for students than a traditional research dissertation, I say, no, it's much harder because they have to address all these things, not just accuracy. Evaluation accountability, this is something that, kind of makes sense. For evaluators, of course, we decided that we need to evaluate our evaluations, right? So a group of evaluators gets together and we think, well, we have to evaluate what we do. So the idea of evaluation accountability is to evaluate the evaluation. And is the evaluation itself worthwhile? Did you follow these standards? How well did you address these standards? For students who I work with, I require them to do what we call internal meta-evaluation. So as part of their dissertation process, they have to show how they addressed each of the standards as their internal meta-evaluation, and they document that in their dissertation. They document the practices that they implement to support quality, their work in addressing evaluation quality. So they monitor that as they go. And then at the end, they kind of do a little assessment, and that's what ends up in their dissertation. They assess the quality of the process and the final product. And usually, in a traditional research dissertation, you'll have a section about maybe validity or trustworthiness and or limitations of the study. I have my students kind of lump that into a section that I call establishing evaluation quality. And they'll put that section in there where they talk about how they addressed and how they did with each of the standards. And that encompasses all of the accuracy, technical adequacy stuff, but it also includes the other things that we know are important for the evaluation profession. So where does this go? This is a structure. This is your very traditional 5-chapter dissertation structure. Those of you who are working on your dissertations, does this look familiar? Yes? Somebody is nodding and they're not smiling, so I don't know. So this is just a traditional structure. So where would something like this go? I have my students put it in the methods section. So they have a little section where they do establishing evaluation quality, where they talk about that. So the next fundamental in our framework is stakeholders. And as Mike said, you know, for us, and as we've been working through some other projects that we've done, we have really decided that stakeholders is just, that is really the differentiating thing for program evaluation from other forms of social science inquiry. The need to involve stakeholders, to work with stakeholders, to just have that collaborative relationship with stakeholders makes evaluation different. So who are stakeholders? You all, a lot of you have had program evaluation. What does that mean when I say stakeholders? Who is that?
The people who stand to benefit, like the clients, or the people who are the employees of the place that's doing the program that you're evaluating, anybody
Right,
that is
the intended beneficiaries of it?
Yeah.
Funders?
Yeah.
Who else might be a stakeholder?
Policymakers.
Who is that?
Policymakers.
The policymakers, yes. Who else? Who else is a potential stakeholder? People who implement the program,
Yeah, employees.
the employees. Yeah, would you say?
Everybody in the logic of governance. Yeah, hierarchies.
Everybody in the hierarchy that you have to report to. Yeah, yeah. So lots of different layers of stakeholders potentially. It's important in evaluation to be aware of who all those are and their role in relationship to the program that you're evaluating, right? And to think through how you might want to involve them in the evaluation. So evaluation is people-focused. We often think of it as being data-focused. When people know what I do for a living, they think that I just run numbers. That's the least of what I do. It's really heavily people-focused, not data-focused. People come first in evaluation. In evaluation, stakeholders serve as data sources. They're people we collect data from and about and all those things. But we also engage them in the evaluation work. So they work with us in various ways. And it depends. You know, you may have very minimal stakeholder involvement and you may have a lot. It kind of depends on what you're doing. But Mike and I argue that you have to have some level of engagement in the work for it to be effective evaluation. That it's really important. So just a few things. We talked about identifying program stakeholders, the need to do that, to think through who are your primary stakeholders. the ones that are most relevant to the work you're doing. How about secondary? How about tertiary? Evaluator roles. So one thing to think about is, what's your role going to be in relationship to the program evaluation? It can be an evaluator-directed evaluation, where you take lead responsibility for everything as the evaluator. You are responsible for the decisions and for the work yourself. It could be more collaborative, where you're working with a group of key stakeholders or a group of program staff or the evaluation manager and a few other top people. Could be more collaborative. It could be participant-directed. Have you all heard of empowerment evaluation when you took your evaluation class? That's where the participants actually direct the evaluation, and the evaluator sits around the table with them and serves as what we call a critical friend. So they advise. They're in more of an advisory role. But the stakeholders themselves are empowered to do the evaluation work. Another thing we talk about is developing a stakeholder engagement plan and log. And again, when I work with students who are doing evaluation dissertations, we talk through this. So what activities within the evaluation are you going to engage stakeholders in? Who are you going to engage, and how are you going to do it? So where in the process are you going to bring people in? And I also have them keep a log of all of their engagement activities, so that we have a record of how they involve stakeholders along the way. And this is just a nice little cartoon that talks about that idea of whether it's evaluator-directed, collaborative, or participant-directed. You have a collaborative evaluation where the evaluator is still kind of taking the lead, but you have a group that's helping out. You have participatory, where the evaluator is kind of part of this participatory process. And then you have empowerment, where the evaluator is kind of sitting there as the advisor. So where does this go? Let's see. In our scheme of things, where would you think you might, I don't know, put a log of stakeholder engagement? Methods. That's where I tell people to put it. And then this isn't like written in stone anywhere. This is just kind of intuitively where I think things go, where we think things might work best. And depending on your dissertation, it may go somewhere else better, or it may go in more than one place. But I have my students in the method section put their stakeholder engagement log. All right, so we've done 2 fundamentals. So what was the first one?
Quality.
Quality. The second one? Stakeholders. And now we're on number 3, which is understanding. So developing understanding of a program and its context. So for evaluation, you know, you're evaluating a program. So you need to understand it very well. You need a deep understanding of the program. You need to understand the context, the systems within which it operates. Those of you who have experience with these sorts of things, who are already, you know, kind of working in this area. I know we have a couple people who are interested in evaluation dissertations. Why would that be important, or more so important, in an evaluation?
Mainly just, again, understanding the content is super important, just because, again, programs could operate differently and they may have different results, but in order to contribute something to the larger body of knowledge, but also to stakeholders who manage and operate those programs, you want to be able to give them something.
Right, right, right.
It's important for internal validity in particular. External validity, I think, would be difficult
Mm-hmm.
to achieve
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to be so idiosyncratic depending upon the organization, its purpose, the mix of
Right.
people involved, et cetera.
Right.
Well, I think it's important to keep in mind that for PA, PA is a combination of public management, public law, and public policy. And so evaluation is essentially going to be looking at an organization like the black box. That's going to be saying it's going to exist in the context of constitutional law, state law,
Mm-hmm.
policies, and so forth. And you can't understand anything that goes on in the black box without understanding that context.
Right, right, right. Really good points. one thing too, and Crystal made me think of this, when we do a traditional kind of research dissertation or research study, we spend a lot of time understanding the phenomena that we're studying, right? So you're doing a similar thing for evaluation. You're spending a lot of time understanding the program because that's the focus of the study that you're doing. So you need to do that, and you do that because, number one, you have to understand what you're evaluating. You have to know what you're evaluating. It also gives you credibility. So when you're coming in as an evaluator, you need to learn and be curious and find out as much as you can about that program and that program context to get your credibility. So some things to think about. Let's see. We're going to talk a little bit about literature review, or maybe a lot, maybe too much about literature review. Program theory models. When you all took program eval, did y'all do anything with logic models or theory of change? Okay. And context analysis. And I'm hearing that politics is really important in your field. So let's talk about literature review. Literature review plays a role in a few key pieces in a dissertation. And so it comes up in a problem statement, and that's usually in your introduction, right, where you have your statement of the problem. So that's informed by research literature. You, of course, will have a whole section or chapter that is just a review of the literature. And that's a lot of fun to write. And then in your discussion section at the end, you're going to go back to that review of the literature and you're going to pull things from it to help interpret your results and your findings, right? So that literature review piece comes up a lot of places. Something that is specific or different for a program evaluation is the idea of the problem statement. So for a traditional research dissertation, you'll have a research problem. And that is, you know, it's literature focused, and it's basically this idea of what we know about the topic and then also what we don't know about the topic. Because when you set up your problem statement, you're basically saying, well, we know all of this, but we still don't know this. Here are our gaps. Therefore, I need to do X, Y, Z for my study, right? So that's kind of how you set up your study and you make the rationale for doing your study. But for an evaluation problem, you also have a literature-focused problem. It's a little bit different because it's going to be what you know about the program and then what you don't know about the program. And it has another element. Because it is applied and because it is locally, it's typically a local problem or a local program. The problem is going to need to have a lens that also addresses the local focus. So we also need to include what we know about the need for the program itself, like why are they even doing this to start with, and the need for the evaluation. So that typically goes in there as well. So why are they now wanting an evaluation? What's the need for this? Where did this come from? So there are a few other layers in a problem statement for an evaluation dissertation. Program theory models, we've kind of categorized them as descriptive and or explanatory, so kind of two different types. And, oops. You all, one of the handouts that you have has an example of a program theory model. So it has a descriptive one. And that's your basic descriptive model that is your kind of linear box logic model type, where you have your inputs and you have your activities and you have your outputs and you have your outcomes, right? And so that's a kind of standard program theory model. Explanatory program theory models are a little bit different. Whereas these just kind of show this linear pathway or this linear logical flow, an explanatory model has additional layers. So they'll also include things like linkages, specific linkages between certain activities and certain outcomes perhaps. They may not always be linear. So you may have things that go multi-directional. You may see some explanatory models that have loops or other ways of representing them. They might look more like a concept map even. They're often things like a theory of change. Did you all do theory of change also? Yeah. And so with the theory of change, you talk not just about how the program is intended to work, but you also talk about how change occurs. So you talk a lot more about the conditions under which the changes will happen. Not just that I'm going to do this activity and this output's going to happen and that's going to lead to this outcome. You talk about, well, what conditions have to happen with those individuals for that to actually work? Or what are the risks, or what are some assumptions we're making? So they look at more variables than we look at in kind of a simple logic model. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow. One of the reasons that we want to do a program theory model in an evaluation dissertation is it sets up a really nice framework for you. It almost works as a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework for a dissertation. So it lays out really clearly what all the pieces of the program are. It provides a really nice framework for literature review. So if you have like the one that you have, your example with the museum, you could use this to focus your literature review, because you would say, okay, what do I know from the literature about informal education, informal STEM education? All sorts of things that are in this model are things that you would want to have literature on. And I have to take my glasses off to see it, so we'll look at it this way. So there's stuff in here about STEM education for pre-K-12. There's things about professional development for teachers. So there's a lot of literature already in existence about those things. So those are the pieces of literature that you would want in your literature review. You'd want to cover all these topics well. The other piece, in addition to this, is context analysis. And some of that gets woven into here too. But context analysis, when you are working with a program, you want to understand the demographics and the characteristics of not just the kind of program itself, but often the larger unit or organization or community within which it operates. So that's kind of a first level context analysis, is just those basic demographics and characteristics. You also want to know something about culture and diversity. So what's the culture of the program? What's the diversity of the program? What's the culture of the organization? What's the culture of the stakeholders, the different stakeholder groups? So you kind of want to know some things about that. What do they value? Do they have different value systems? Do the participants, the program participants, have different value systems than the people who develop the program? So lots of different things you can think of there. And then politics. And again, it sounds like that might be one that you all need to think about. And that's at the program level. Programs have their own politics, right? The local level, and so that could be your community, your region, even your state. Broader, that could be national politics even, because that impacts a lot of the work that we do. What's going on at the national level impacts things that happen at the program level. So you need to be aware of that. Economics and power. There are power structures, resources. The people who hold the resources typically hold power. And so we have to be aware of who those people are and what their role in the program is and how that may impact the outcomes. So this is a favorite quote or piece. Context is a force in evaluation. It shapes our practice, influencing how we as evaluators approach and design our studies, how we carry them out, and how we report our findings. So your work should consider context every step of the way. When you're developing your purpose, when you're developing your evaluation questions, when you're coming up with your choosing evaluation approaches, developing your design, how you're going to collect data, you need to think about context. You need to think about the demographics and the characteristics of the stakeholders. You need to think about the culture and the diversity and the politics as you go through those processes and make those decisions. But context also moderates the outcomes. So the different contextual factors also have an impact on whether or not or to what extent our outcomes are going to be achieved. So we need to be aware of that as well. Where does it go? So your problem statement that we talked about is going to go in the introduction probably. You're also going to have an overview of the program where you describe the program and maybe some demographics and characteristics and those sorts of things. Evaluation purpose and questions are informed by those things. So that's why I put those there, because they're informed by that. Your problem statement leads to the purpose for the evaluation and the evaluation questions. Also, obviously, the idea of understanding, doing a lit review, you're going to have a whole chapter probably that's a review of the literature. And then you're also going to have, usually, and this could go some different places, but usually my students put a program description in the methods section, and they also put their program theory model, whether it's a logic model or theory of change or any of those, they usually put it in the methods section. You're also going to describe your study site and participants there. So again, that's your demographics, characteristics, that sort of information. And discussion, as I mentioned, literature review comes up again there. You're going to pull that literature back into the discussion section. Have I run out of time yet, Mike?
Yeah, I think we're doing great.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, I got one
Yeah.
more.
Yep.
All right, so what did we do so far? We did quality, then we did what? Stakeholders, and then understanding, and now we're to logic. So logic is another unique aspect of program evaluation. We don't talk a lot about logic and values when we talk about research, do we? Particularly not values. We like to pretend like that doesn't exist, that's a little too subjective for research. But in evaluation, we embrace that. The word value is actually in the word evaluation. And so our job as evaluators is to help people come up with a value judgment or to determine the value of something or the worth of something. So we use logic, evaluation logic, to help us develop our purpose, our questions and findings so that we can come up with that value judgment or that judgment of worth or merit. So here's a favorite cartoon where the researcher says, I can't tell you how valuable your program is, but the evaluator says, I can. Because again, that's our job. And of course, we're not going to do it alone, right? We're going to have other people to kind of help us through the process. So logic of evaluation, we'll talk a little bit about that. Evaluation purpose and evaluation questions. So logic of evaluation basically is that idea that we want to get to some sort of judgment at the end of this. That, giving your client a report that just has the data analysis results and some findings is not sufficient. You need to give them something that answers questions that are themselves evaluative. So we create our evaluation purpose and questions with that in mind, that in the end, we want the questions that are answered to give them that summary of the value of the program, if that makes sense. All right, so the evaluation purpose is the overarching goal or objective of the evaluation. It's the reason for conducting it. And there are some general purposes for evaluation. One is development and direction of programs. So this is kind of a thing where we might use evaluation in a needs assessment way or to get clarification around a program that we're thinking about developing, to do some logic modeling, that sort of thing, and to determine whether what we're developing is going to be plausible, whether it's going to plausibly lead to the outcomes that we want it to lead to. There are also purposes that are learning and program improvement, and that's typically what we call formative evaluation, where we're going to get feedback for those close to the program. And then there's learning and accountability. Often that might be summative evaluation, what works and why. So those are our sort of purposes. And if you go back, and I was talking about that idea of values and logic, the logic of evaluation, these are purposes that have that kind of built into them. Yes?
On the last point there, what works and why, in some organizations, it seems like it might be more beneficial, and I don't know if that's part of it, is what doesn't work and why not. Is that a piece, or is that depending on the
I think
needs?
it's a flip side of the coin. So, typically you kind of find out one, that kind of leads you to this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So ultimately you want to know what works. But yeah, I mean, finding out what doesn't work helps you find out what does, or it helps
Well,
you change,
sometimes I
it helps you
think
change
the
paths.
why question, maybe it would work if it was done
If
in
you
a
did
different
X, Y,
approach,
Z,
but-
yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, I had a student who did a dissertation, and she had a result for this professional development they were doing that had gone fully online, and it wasn't good. And so they were ready to just scrap the whole thing. And I was like, wait. No. I'm like, I think you need to do some additional work here and find out exactly why it didn't work well. Because it may not be that the whole thing just needs to be scrapped. It may be that the way that you went about it, the design of it, the development of it, the marketing, and these were K-12 teachers who used to get this professional development during the school day, and now they're being asked to do it on their own, online, on their time. So there are a lot of factors in there, right? So yeah, exactly. Evaluation questions. This is, in my mind, this is one of the most important things in an evaluation, is to get the questions right. So evaluation questions need to be big picture evaluative questions, and these are the questions that are going to be answered by the evaluation. They're not questions that are going to be on your survey. They're questions that all the data you collect, when analyzed and compiled, it's going to answer these, okay? And just as a reminder, evaluation is not the same thing as data. It's not the same thing as data collection. It's not the same thing as data collection instruments. How many of you have ever gotten a survey and somebody said, we want you to take this evaluation or complete this evaluation for me, right? Right. One survey is not an evaluation, is it? No. All right. So evaluation is not any of those things. It includes those things, but it's not synonymous with them. Evaluation is answering meaningful questions that address value and worthwhileness, the worthwhileness of something, or the best way to get to worthwhileness. And that's one of the things you were talking about, Bob, was that idea of, kind of figuring out the best way to get there. And this is, if you don't remember anything else from this, don't put your methods cart before the questions horse, meaning I often have people come to me and say, well, I want to do an evaluation. I want to survey these people, and I say, well, what do you want to know? Well, and they haven't thought through that. So they don't actually have evaluation questions yet. Maybe they have them somewhere, but they haven't really clearly articulated them. But they know what data they want to collect. And data collection is definitely a fun part, and we like to think about how we're going to do that and how we're going to collect it. But it's not going to be very useful to us if we don't know what it is we want to know from the data. So we got to start with the questions. So questions first, methods later. Here's a little checklist. And you'll get a copy of this in handouts tomorrow. Just some things to think about when you're creating your evaluation questions. Usually, because remember, these are your big picture questions for the whole evaluation. You don't want a whole lot of them. So you're going to have 3 to 5 maybe. Clear and concise, stand alone. They shouldn't rely on other questions to make sense. They need to align with the evaluation purpose because they're going to address the evaluation purpose. The purpose is the reason you're doing the evaluation, so the questions need to work with them. Big picture, not narrow. Are they evaluative? And are they free from references to data collection methods, data collected, or data analysis procedures? An evaluation question, your big picture question, shouldn't talk about how you're going to collect the data, or how you're going to analyze the data. That comes later. And that in this place, when you're doing your evaluation questions, it locks you in to things. And there may be other ways that you want to collect data. So if you specify here that some sort of data collection or some sort of analysis, does such and such rate well, you're already saying that you're going to do some sort of ratings. So you don't want to do that here. And I've actually put these in red because these are the toughest ones, and these are tough for me. And I don't know if they're still tough for you, Mike, too, but...
Everything's tough for me now.
But making sure that my questions are big picture and that they're evaluative, and I'm not kind of reverting to making them a little more discrete. And I'll give you a couple examples. So here's one. So instead of how many people did the program reach, this is talking about your data collection right here. This is an indicator, right? Ask how adequate was program reach, or did we reach enough people? Did we reach the right people? These are your evaluative questions. These are things that have values embedded in them. Just a number, a count, that doesn't get at valuing. That doesn't get at worth. Adequate reach gets at worth. Did you reach the right people? That gets at worth. Here's another one. Were program outcomes achieved? That's okay, and I've used similar versions of that before. But here's a better way to do it. How substantial and valuable were the outcomes, or how valuable were they to XYZ participants? Were they worth achieving given the effort and investment? So those are more value, worthwhile types of questions. So those are a couple. So where does it go? So we talked about evaluation purpose. We talked about evaluation questions. Those typically go in your introduction, where you kind of going to lay out, you have your problem statement, and then that's going to fall into, we need to do this, so therefore the purpose of the evaluation is X, Y, Z, and these are the questions that are going to address that purpose. Now, I have seen dissertations where these go other places, and I don't know what y'all's kind of protocol is here, but this is where I tend to put them. And then, of course, your evaluation findings in the discussion are going to come back to those questions, because your findings are going to answer the questions. It's your job as an evaluator to answer the evaluation questions, not just give people a bunch of data and results and say, here's your evaluation. Well, you didn't answer the questions. So it's your job to answer them. And so what did I go through? We went through quality, stakeholders, understanding, liberty, and justice for all. How about approaches for all? Approaches for all.
Great, okay. Just as Tamara had mentioned and had the picture up there of the methods cart in front of the evaluation questions horse, a trap we've fallen into in evaluation, particularly in past years, is that, when they talk about evaluation, they talk about the approach they use. I do this approach, or I do that approach. And we place the approach in the context of 6 fundamental evaluation practices. And the approach, it frames just about all of the evaluation work. Evaluation approaches and models, they got to align with the purpose and the questions and the like, and that helps us in some ways kind of get past this idea that I do an outcome evaluation, or I use Guskey's model, or whatever it is. There are lots of different schemas, lots of different approaches out there. We're going to list just a few of them here. But regardless of the categorization, there's a lot of overlap in these approaches, and people take an approach and they'll twist it a little bit and then make a new approach, and this kind of thing happens in the field. Recall the purposes that Tamara talked about. And so here's a reminder. Okay, I'm not pressing hard enough. here's a reminder of the different purposes. And let's talk about development direction. The emphasis here is a need for program clarification, program intent and plausibility. So here's some of the approaches that you might use for this particular approach. And some of these hopefully are recognizable to you. Certainly needs assessment. Valuability assessment is the extent to which the program theory conceptually aligns with what is actually implemented, and there's a process to go through there. Let's take the next one on, learning and program improvement. Here are some different approaches that you could take, and hopefully some of these are familiar to you if you've had an evaluation course. And learning and accountability, what works and why. Here, a list of different approaches that one could take. Okay. So the evaluation design would take into consideration all these different aspects, the purpose, the question, the approaches, and then the design. And you could put all this into a table, and that's what we'd recommend. And so we've got a table here. And it starts with the evaluation question, but it compels this alignment. So data sources, who will the data be collected from? And you think about the participant sample, the sampling procedures, data collection methods, how will the data be collected, the various kinds of instruments, the procedures. Who will collect the data and when? Use a figure or table to depict the timeline. Where does it go in here? Where would you think you'd put this stuff, the approach? Methods, yeah. Review of literature, you could have evaluation approaches just as comparing and contrasting, but certainly you'd put them in the method section. Yeah. All right, and then use, I won't go through all the other have you go through all that, but this is the last of the 6 fundamental practices of evaluation, and that is using it. Okay? And there's a watchword now in evaluation, and that's utilization-focused evaluation. Is that a phrase that people have heard? Utilization-focused evaluation? Okay. Michael Patton is the one who has come up with an approach called utilization-focused evaluation, and he maintains that evaluation should be used by its intended users for its intended purposes. Okay? And if evaluations aren't used, there's no point in doing them. Okay? And in the early time of evaluation, evaluators simply thought that, well, their job was to generate the report and was up to the managers to use the data, use the evaluation, and that's no longer the case. We maintain as a core responsibility in evaluation, finding ways to get evaluation to be used. So let's consider evaluation dissertations. Evaluation dissertation would be certainly useful to the program. It contributes to local knowledge. Okay. Oops. Pressing too hard. And useful to the field. Usefulness to the field contributes to academic knowledge. So here's what we mean by use. It entails findings or recommendations and the implications. You need to develop a communication plan. And there are some reporting tools and formats that are available in doing this. From the standards book, this Yarborough et al., or the authors who put the standards book together, argue that evaluations have merit when they contribute to stakeholders' learning, inform decisions, improve understanding, lead to improvements, etc. And that's their idea about use. Okay? The findings, they have application of data analysis results to answer the evaluation questions, and they're interpreted in context. Okay. Okay. Recommendations. Recommendations for the program based on findings and program context. Make sure that they're specific, meaningful to stakeholders, realistic, actionable. Okay? And we advocate engaging stakeholders in developing the recommendations. In fact, as we flesh this out further, we recommend involving stakeholders in just about every aspect of the evaluation. In fact, going back to the evaluation questions. And the reason there is if stakeholders are going to be more interested in use the evaluation if they can see things in the evaluation that are important to them. And those are usually shaped in the evaluation questions. And implications, I'm going through quickly now, watching the time, or the implications of the evaluation of the program and similar programs, future research, they're based on findings. Now, when we think about evaluation use, we need to find ways, embedded in here is communicating about the evaluation. And here's some ideas for putting together a communication plan. What is the evaluation information or ideas that you want to communicate? So this plan is based on answering some questions here. What's the purpose for this communication? What stakeholder group or groups do you want to communicate to? And which format and tools will you use to communicate? Okay. And here's some examples of reporting formats and tools. Interim evaluation report. I mean, this should sound familiar to you, even if you hadn't had a program evaluation course. Full evaluation report, executive summary, PowerPoint presentation, summary sheets, findings tables, scorecards, interactive web pages, blogs, social media, infographics, data visualization tools. All these things are at your disposal. I think another trap some evaluators have fallen into is that it becomes all about the tool. It's the infographics, it's the data visualization. And some of these are pretty slick if you've toyed with them, and a lot of them are available free over the internet. There's a lot of power and potential in these. But this is, again, these are tools and formats to try to get at use. And where would you think this goes?
Discussion.
In the discussion? Well, you could put the communication plan in the method section, but certainly the findings, recommendation, implications would go in the discussion section. All right, so I rifled through that really quick, but now I'll turn it back over to Tammy.
All right, thank you. So that's our 6 fundamentals of evaluation practice. Things to think about, to be conscious of, to be intentional about if you're doing an evaluation dissertation, or in your professional work down the road. Even if you don't do an evaluation dissertation, you will probably find yourself working on an evaluation at some point. So things to be conscious of. A few things that Mike and I think in terms of evaluation, I can't say it now for some reason. Can you all say it? Say that, evaluation dissertation. It's tough, right? Okay. So anyway, they have the potential to, we think, build evaluation capacity among students, faculty, and program stakeholders. So as students, you learn how to do and use evaluation. Faculty, you have a lot of faculty who don't necessarily have expertise or knowledge of program evaluation. They know research, but they don't necessarily know evaluation. And so your process of involving them on your committees can build capacity there. And then, of course, your program stakeholders, your evaluation client, and your other stakeholders. They also have the potential to contribute to knowledge, local knowledge at the program level, but also academic knowledge. When you bring in that research literature and you interpret your findings in the context of those, and you create those implications for future research and evaluation, you're contributing to academic knowledge at that point. And they promote program evaluation as a discipline. So we wanted to leave some time at the end. I think if that clock's correct, we did exactly what we wanted because we
Yep.
wanted to make sure we
Yep.
had 15 minutes at the
Yep.
end.
Yep.
So we have a little time for questions, comments, anything you all would like to share about your experiences.
So I'll ask something here. My interest area at this point is teacher evaluation. And in Illinois, we have a law called PARA. And PARA was put into place in 2012 and completely changed the way teachers are evaluated, how they are ranked for tenure and seniority and riffing. And added to that was a 25 to 30% student growth measure for the first time. So would you see this as a viable way to maybe take a larger school district like the Springfield Public Schools and look at the impact prior to para and post-para?
So as a policy evaluation. Yeah, yeah. And I don't know that I'd necessarily do it. I think, how far are you along with this idea?
Just getting started,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah, so I would say, again, you don't put the methods cart before the questions horse. So you don't know whether you want to do a pre or a post yet, but kind of do your foundational work. But yeah, that sounds like a really great,
Sure.
a really great evaluation study.
Yeah, absolutely. There is let me mention, when you said evaluation of teachers, there is a field called personnel evaluation, which is not what we're talking about here. But what you're framing here is, you know, the policy part of that, and that's exactly what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
yeah. I think we don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, you
Oh, okay. All right, for my study, and I'm still at the very beginning stages of this too, but I'm actually looking to compare a youth diversion program for criminal justice, comparing that to traditional probation. People that go through, well, young people that go through both programs, and looking to see if one was necessary or do we not even need it at all. So that's because there's a lot of money that goes into these kinds of programs. So that's just kind of what I'm looking to evaluate from the very beginning. Could change, but that's where we are right now.
Okay. Is there a program like that here in Springfield?
Yeah, there are more than 1,800 of these
Wow.
diversion programs. They're called teen courts.
Okay.
And so we have one about 40 minutes west of here, I think, or west, east. I know my directions, east. And so looking to evaluate that one, comparing that to traditional probation in that same area. And I don't know, I don't know what we're going to find, but I'm curious to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you found other evaluations that have been done on similar programs?
Yes, they have been done. They're all around the United States.
Yeah.
And one of the questions that typically comes up is, you know, is there a reduction of recidivism for young people that come through this program, which was really the only tangible thing that I've found in a
Yeah.
lot of the research and the literature that exists now. But very few of them talk about processes and all that things because all the programs are different.
Yeah.
And so they just use the same names, but they operate quite differently.
Interesting.
I know that, you know, I'm not up on the detail, but at one point I had looked at various disciplines in their evaluation work, and criminal justice was a hotbed of evaluation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I suspect there's a literature and the like there, so.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to see like a program theory model for that too. That would be interesting. That would be, with that in and of itself, putting together a theory of change for something like that would be a huge contribution. Yeah.
An observation I have, or maybe it's a question, or you can correct me. What you're advocating, you know, the two projects we've heard, right, are let's compare what was before and what happened afterwards. The model of dissertation you guys are talking about is not comparing what was before.
It
It's how,
could be, it
well, it
could
could
be.
be possibly, but It focuses on how well is this criminal justice program working, how well is this school district implementing this new law,
Yeah.
and the methods that they're using to achieve it. Is that more what
Yeah.
program evaluation is like?
It's how worthwhile is it? Or how can we best get it to be more worthwhile?
This is like a difference on that continuum to
Yeah.
start off with.
Yeah.
Comparing before and after is a little more researchy. How
Yeah.
well are they
Though we
doing?
use those designs in evaluation too. It just depends on what questions you're asking.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's the real trick, is to try to resist getting down the methods trail before evaluation
what-
questions are.
Well, and
yeah.
understanding the context, all those things we
Yeah.
talked about, knowing the literature, doing your context analysis, doing your program theory model, and kind of understanding all the components and things that are part of the program.
I mean, they're all good questions.
Yeah.
It's just, I
Yeah.
think what you're advocating is a more practical or a more applied, less
Absolutely.
theoretical approach.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It isn't answering global questions.
Right.
Yeah, and here, yes.
Yeah, so I just, so this was really, really interesting. I think it'll be really valuable to the students. So I had a question. I know we don't want to put the methods cart too far ahead, but I'm thinking about these in the context of our methods classes that we teach here. So I'm teaching the quant class, and then
Okay.
we also have the qualitative class. And, so the qualitative class is going to be, oriented on using things like NVigo and finding, patterns across statements. And of course, class in mine is going to be about building statistical models and, learning those various types of techniques there. In your work, how amenable are many of those, shall we say, traditional methods that are taught in those classes? How amenable are they to something like this? Because I imagine there'd be a lot of uses there, but I'm thinking about the next iteration when I do the quant class, I'm having it have program evaluation methods to it. So I was just curious about what you see in terms of the stats methods or the qualitative analysis methods embedded within some of these things.
Oh, you have to have all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's absolutely
I imagine
essential.
you would, but-
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah,
essential. I think the mistake, I guess that would be the right word, and a long time ago I taught methods courses too, so I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
But the mistake I think we've made as evaluation field is to, yes, if you can enjoy teaching, right? I know you're just shaking your head. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. That's for
I
sure.
still do.
But the mistake we've made in the evaluation field is to think evaluation is the method. And what we're trying to say is that that's part of it, sure, but there's a whole lot of other things that go into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look at, and if you're going to be at the thing tomorrow, we'll talk more about evaluator competencies. But there is a methodology domain, and that's all about quantitative, qualitative, mixed methods, and kind of that technical adequacy. But there are also other domains with, just like the standards, there are other domains with program evaluation, like kind of your non-technical skills. There's an interpersonal domain. So there are other pieces to it that are different than when you're just looking at the methods part, but the methods are most definitely embedded in there.
And we've had, we are decidedly taking a very pragmatic approach to this, absolutely. And we think evaluation is a pragmatic enterprise for the most part. But there are all kinds of theoretical aspects to it. But if we slice it just in terms of the method, the evaluation has field, I should say the discipline of evaluation has always, not always, has fallen into the trap of the battle between qualitative methods and quantitative methods, just like broader research has. I assume that this same kind of tension is in public administration. It's, well, okay, so it's, I mean, it's just, it's broad, it's pervasive. I can remember, this was probably 7 or 8 years ago, but we had people like Lipsy, Mark Lipsy and the like. So in one room, so there's the American Evaluation Association meeting, right? Okay, so there's one room, and there are all the quantitative evaluators in there talking about how it couldn't possibly, we couldn't possibly incorporate qualitative methods into impact evaluation and the like. and talk it, but they would say that there's a certain place for it. And then in the next room, you'd have the qualitative folks railing against the people in the other room. I mean, it was exactly like that. And
That's all PA conferences.
what's that?
That's all PA
And
conferences.
it's the same thing? Yeah.
Social science.
Yeah,
Yeah.
social science,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So, but we've taken a decidedly pragmatic approach, and we're specifically focused on those individuals who reside in an organization and they have as part of their job duties evaluation, or all of their duties are evaluation, but they're still embedded in an organization. And that's the kind of, and it's not just about a method.
Yeah.
Right?
It's about answering your questions, and you use whatever you need to use to answer those questions.
Yeah.
And most of the time, you're going to need to use quantitative and qualitative
Sure.
to answer those questions.
And the people in those two rooms are, that I described at the AEA meeting have missed the fundamental points about evaluation, and that is evaluation always occurs in a political context.
Mm-hmm.
Always. And I think everybody here would agree to that. As a consequence, thinking through things systematically, understanding the connections that are present. And sometimes you have to uncover them. Using good communication strategies consistently from beginning to end, even when others don't. I mean, all of these things are part of doing evaluation. And there's a woman by the name of Laura Levitin, and she was at one point the president of the American Evaluation Association. And in 2000, each president has a keynote address at this meeting. She made this comment that we have, as evaluators, missed the mark, that we haven't paid attention to these other aspects in evaluation. I think she was particularly focused on the idea that we think of evaluation as a method, and we forget that there's all these people involved, and as a consequence, non-technical skills or professional skills are so important. Mm-hmm. So what Tamara and I are trying to do is to find a way to tease this out in some kind of framework that people can grasp, particularly graduate students who have to do capstones. We're trying to, and we're trying to do this for faculty members as well, because I think faculty members also want to have something that's professionally meaningful for students who are professionally oriented in their graduate programs, but we haven't been trained how. There's nothing to grab a hold of. So what do we grab a hold of? We grab a hold of the research methods frameworks that we learned about and continue to use. So that's, yeah.
Will you share with Dr. Bland when your book is published and purchase, we can purchase that? So if we wanted more information on
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
When is it supposed to be published?
Well, let's see, a hurricane kind of got in the way, so
Among
we're slowed
other
down a little
things.
bit. I don't mean to blame
Yeah,
Tara,
it's
but
blaming me.
And you have another one
Yeah, it was me.
right now.
And there's
Yeah.
another one coming
Yeah.
that way, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering if I'm going to get back to Wilmington Friday.
so we've been delayed.
Welcome to UIS.
Yeah.
Might be-
Yeah, might be here for a while.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, I've been on this campus longer than I've been on my own campus in the past month, so.
Yeah. So there, yeah, let's see, we're probably shooting for next summer, I'm guessing.
I think, well, our latest was, I think it's going to be 2020 before it actually comes out.
Probably gets
When we lost
compressed.
our last conversation with the editor, it looked like 2020
Okay.
because our plan is to get our stuff finished up by spring, but
Right.
then they start their process
Right.
of proofing and all the copies and the whatevers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it takes a little bit of
We
time.
have a room full of reviewers for you.
I know, and
Yeah,
I
no,
was
absolutely,
thinking that it would be
absolutely, yeah.
great to have people review it who are
Yeah.
actually are engaged in dissertations, because we did the first 4 chapters we've already drafted, and we submitted those, and we got the peer reviews feedback that Sage sent out for, but those were all faculty members who did those reviews. and we don't know exactly who, but we know that they were faculty members. So it would actually be pretty cool to have
Yep,
some
absolutely.
graduate students review the book, since that's our primary audience.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were, in truth, we've been delayed because we've actually had some opportunities to do various things that we weren't aware of at the time, and so that just
Yeah,
kind
like we're not writing right now.
Right, yeah.
We weren't writing last week when
Yeah.
we were
No, we were
at
in Greece.
EES.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So that's pretty cool.
yeah.
Any last questions?
So what's your book will be teaching differently? Because, you know, like me, I took evaluation courses in MPH, public health program. I did in PA. I can see the different focuses for those two type of courses. So now yours, I already heard that, you know, evaluation, it's more people focused than data, or it's not even data focused, it's people focused. So, you know, that's the mail really trick some thinking in me, because I was thinking we should be both. And it depends the question. It might be more data focused than people focused.
Sure.
Or it be both. I can't really see just one, not the other.
Right.
So what would be the difference from the book?
Well, I mean, your point's a good one, so let me try to use that as a means to clarify what our message is here, and that is, you know the pendulum swings back and forth in various continuums, right? And so part of what we're trying to do is get a hold of the pendulum so it doesn't swing so much, okay? So that's, metaphorically, that's what we're trying to do here. The book is really, there are books about how to do a qualitative dissertation, how to do a thesis, how to, that. Our book is about how to do an evaluation-oriented dissertation, thesis, or culminating project.
And
Yeah.
so our,
You both come from an education background, we do
Yes.
educational evaluation.
Right.
Not that that's a limitation,
Yeah.
but that's obviously going to be where you draw your examples primarily. Or maybe not.
Yes,
no,
yes,
actually no, because
Yeah.
We've been in contact with a lot of
Okay,
people.
so social workers
Yeah,
or
so we have brought in lots of people that
Okay,
we're talking
great.
to that we're going to
Yeah.
use examples from. Yeah,
And we've done evaluations in other
context.
Yeah.
other contexts.
Yeah.
And we gave a workshop to a United Nations agency as well. So it's,
Okay.
yeah. Actually, that's kind of funny. We have another book that we wrote on evaluability assessment, and we have case examples in that book. And the first feedback we got was that we needed to have some case examples from areas other than public health, because it was public health heavy.
Yeah.
And we thought that was really funny, because we both work in education,
Right.
and the feedback we got was that we had a lot of public health examples. And so
I think what we can say about our education and training is that it was, for both of us, we had an interdisciplinary focus. So,
I mean,
yeah.
people who do psychometrics apply that in medicine, apply that
Sure.
in other areas.
Yeah.
Right, right.
It's not
Yeah,
that these things are completely disjointed.
right.
Right.
I was building on what
Yeah.
different focuses
And
that
obviously,
Nelson mentioned.
like for me personally, when I think about, the students I work with on dissertations, they're all in education, whether it's K-12 or higher ed or some other sort of informal education agency. So, my personal experiences are mostly, in terms of dissertations, are with them.
Right.
But, yeah, but I'm willing to sit on other committees too.
Sure. And what's interesting, I think, for us is when this is applied in a different context. I mean,
Yeah.
we learn about it,
Right.
like
Yeah.
public administration, for example.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a benefit for us, yes.
So I'm in the healthcare sector, and I think that we underutilize theory of change in establishing programs. So I work for
Yeah.
an organization that's owned by a number of collaborators, most of them are health systems, and there is a lot of, I'm trying to steer them in the direction of beginning with the end in mind. What objectives do they want to accomplish for the program? And I think we'll hear more about that tomorrow too from the healthcare folks who are going to be talking. A little different than what the projects are that I'm working on, but I do think that in terms of program construction, understanding what those outcomes should look like
Right,
will help, I think, inform then evaluating
yeah.
back to, I just don't think we do enough of that upfront.
I agree. I mean, and I think, ideally, evaluators would be around the table, or people with evaluation skills would be around the table as part of development. And, in our world, we end up doing a lot of grant work, and I'm often asked to come on as an evaluator for a grant that faculty are developing, and they want me to come on as an evaluator, and I won't do it unless they allow me to be part of the whole process. I don't want to just write a little evaluation plan that they stick at the last minute and send it off to the funding agency. I want to be around the table when they're talking about what their outcomes are, because what happens to me is if I don't, I get what they've written, and I don't, this isn't really an outcome. So, we have to kind of redo a lot of things, so, yeah.
It helps with understanding that the context of the program too, so that you can. evaluate.
Absolutely, I want to be there for the whole thing.
I'm
Yeah.
a grant writer too, and finally someone that speaks English. And what I mean by that is it is hard to find other people that understand the multiple moving parts
Right,
when it comes to evaluating anything with grants. And that's
Right.
just a small component of evaluation.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't, given my role these last few years, I don't do any grant work. But what I do is work with my associate dean for research to ensure that if one of our faculty members is being bid on a grant, that they have a grant proposal, that they have adequate resources to get it done. I mean, that's another thing attached to evaluation. There's a lot of expectations and not a lot of resources to pull off those expectations. So within the university, that's how I can have an impact. Yeah.
You said you are willing to serve on a committee?
Long distance. Hey, join me in thanking our presenters.